Hi, I'm Micah Clark with American Family Association. Thank you for joining us today. In my weekly email this week on Wednesday, I wrote about a new study that George Barna did that Washington Stand, which is a publication of the Family Research Council, put out. We made a fact sheet about this because the study, I think, is so important. You can find that on our website. But the study from George Barna is about evangelicals in America. We've heard a lot about evangelicals, especially in this election cycle. You know, the left wants to scare voters about evangelicals. The right relies on evangelical voters. But the study is very important because it talks about the strength of the evangelical community, Christians in America, and the findings frankly are not good. Evangelicals are much smaller than people thought. And more importantly, although there are tens of millions of them, they make up 25 to 35% of the vote in the fall. Most evangelical Christians are conforming to the culture. That's what the research found. Christians today are much more likely to conform to the culture than to conform the culture or confront the culture. In fact, the stereotype of the evangelical getting in your face is not true, if it ever was, but the research finds that actually evangelicals are much less likely to talk about things with people. They tend to self-censor. The culture, I think, is so anti-Christian, so liberal today that I don't think many Christians know how to fit into it or confront it. I want to talk to you about that in regard to that. I think the most important thing that we can do as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, is to have our nieces, nephews, children, grandchildren be countercultural. What does the culture promote today? What does it not promote? What has it forgotten? And I think what is it forgotten is very important because our culture is a post-Christian world and it's a post-intellectual world in a lot of ways. We live in a very short 15-second soundbite type of system. TikTok, videos, attention spans are short. I want to talk to you just about some practical things today that I think you can do as a parent and as a grandparent or as an aunt and uncle. You know, my kids are now in their early 20s, and there's a saying that the days as a parent are long, but the years are fast. Your children, your grandchildren will go from the age of 6 to 16 like that. It'll just go past so quickly. So we have a very limited amount of time of reaching them before their worldviews are affected. And something that my wife and I did, perhaps more me, my wife taught, but when my kids were young, I went to a lot of old bookstores, antique stores, and started buying books both for myself and things I wanted my children to know. And I brought some of those with me today because I think there's things that are in our past that our kids need to know. Our kids need heroes today. There's a great quote I put in an email recently. It's from a motivational speaker. He said, "Show me the heroes of the youth of our country to look up to, and I will tell you the future of your country." And I wonder what our kids' heroes are today. You know, I go to a movie and I see previews, all the Marvel movies and things like that. They're so dark. It's shocking what our kids look up to. And I think our kids are forgetting some things that they need to know. So here's some practical things. I went through my bookshelf in our TV room, and I wanted to show you a few things because I think these things are important. But for very cheap, you can find on eBay or old bookstore a series. These are some of the things I pulled off my shelf. Many of you have seen these, especially if you're a homeschool mom. These are called Great Illustrated Classics. You can buy these for a couple bucks a piece at bookstores. This is Swiss Family Robinson. This is Robinson Crusoe. Both great literature. And you know, these are written for like a junior high or high school level. Probably used to be junior high, maybe high school level now. But you can read one of these in about 3 hours, and I've read these. You know, I haven't read Robinson Crusoe. It's a thick book. It's very difficult to read. A very popular book, one of the most popular books in the world when it was written, and it has Christian principles in that book. Crusoe prays to God for a friend. God sends him Friday, prays him for food, things like that. But you can get these classics and have your kids read these. They're very entertaining. They only take a few hours to read. Because I've seen in our schools, I've seen the literature lists, I've seen the books. A lot of them are garbage. A lot of them are, and I'm not saying that necessarily they're wrong, they're just not good, solid classic literature that I think teaches clear values. Another set of books that I think we've got about 20 of these. I bought these at various places. These are written probably in the 50s and 60s. These actually came from the Atlanta, Indiana library. They were discarded. These are books, The Landing of the Pilgrims. I read this and learned a lot. There's a lot in these little books, these classic books. I don't know who produced them. They were Random House books. You'll see these in bookstores. Here's one on Daniel Boone. Great book. One of my favorite books because I love World War II, and this is a phenomenal story. It's not spiritual per se, but 30 Seconds Over Tokyo is a great book about the Doolittle raid in World War II. I don't know how much that's being taught in school, but it's a great read for kids to read. There's a great movie on that too. My wife bought a bunch of these at a homeschool convention. These are called Heroes of History. This is a book on William Penn. This is a book on Nate Saint, the missionary, about his life. And this is a book here I grabbed on D.L. Moody. These are quick reads also. Kids can read through these. Great book report types of things. But they're just good, solid reading about people of faith, people who are heroes in our culture, heroes in history, that our culture is quickly forgetting. These books, many of you have these. Some of these were actually mine. My son went through a stage where he wanted to read the Hardy Boys books. No great moral lessons in these, but just good, solid literature, entertaining things that were very popular for decades and decades and decades, and they've long been forgotten by many kids today. I think those are the types of things that we need to supplement our kids' learning with, whether they go to a homeschool, private school, or public school. I think instilling values in kids, and our children, our grandchildren, nieces, and nephews, is very important. You know, one book can really light up a child's imagination if it's a good book with good things. One of the books I read when I was 18 years old is a little higher level that shaped me quite a bit, and I've got several copies of this. I've given so many copies of this away over the years. Now, a book I agree with 100% on everything, but it really makes you think. It was very foundational to my thought. Barry Goldwater in the 1960s wrote a book called The Conscience of a Conservative. I think everybody should read this. It tells a lot about conservative economic theory. Very good book. A lot of history in this book called The Conscience of a Conservative. Many of you will recognize that book. Another book I meant to bring that I gave to a young man who was a friend of my son's. He came home from college. He was reading some stuff, and he asked me what books I liked. I just read a book by Jeremiah Denton, a former senator, but he was a POW in Vietnam, called When Hell Was in Session, about his faith, how he made it through in solitary confinement for years, mistreatment, held on to his faith in a Vietnam prison where the communists held him for years. So these are the types of things I think we need to think about. We have a small window of time where we can influence our kids, and what they read, what they watch, what they are exposed to is vitally important in their worldview. Now, movies are another big thing. A movie I recommend, and this isn't the Micah movie review show, but I've made my kids watch this movie several times because it's about a real-life person, Sergeant York. Gary Cooper made this. This was a movie that won the Best Picture Oscar in 1941. It's about a man who won more medals, the highest decorated man in World War I, Alvin York from Tennessee. It's about his faith and the conflict he had in going to war as a pacifist. This pacifist won the Congressional Medal of Honor. I think over 300 Germans surrendered to him in a battle in World War I. Phenomenal movie, a great book. Also, you can read his diary. But these are people that kids do not know anything about today. And this man was very influential in both World War I and World War II. Great movie, great family night movie. And just because it's black and white doesn't mean it's not worth watching. This is a phenomenal movie. Some great lessons in this about faith, about freedom, and about patriotism. Another more recent movie that many of you have seen is about William Wilberforce, the man who led the Christian man who had a conflict with his faith as a politician in Britain and decided once becoming a Christian he needed to end slavery. And more than any other person in the world, William Wilberforce was responsible for the end of slavery, both in America, but more importantly in Britain. Of course, we had to fight a war over it, but he set the groundwork for the abolition movement, ending slavery as a Christian. And this is a great movie. It's called Amazing Grace. It was out about 15 years ago. You can find it easily again on eBay or other places. So when you do a movie night at home, and my kids, they look at me like, oh, Dad's doing it again. Pick what you're watching and think about the messages being sent. I have a friend who's a filmmaker, an artist. He told me one time, every movie is somebody's sermon. So when you go watch a movie, know that everything they do, every line, every scene has been edited, reviewed multiple times. It's in there intentionally. And so there is a message being preached in the movie. We can't simply turn our brains off being entertained. And we watch, in my house, we watch things just for fun. We watch fluff. But it's very important to talk about what your kids are seeing, to show them things that teach values that may stick with them. And there's so many good movies about that. And that's what I want to close with today. There's a movie that just came out this week. It's number 3 at the box office. It's exceeding expectations. It's about this man, one of my heroes, former President Ronald Reagan. The movie is called Reagan, starring Dennis Quaid. And I would encourage you to see this movie. Take your kids to see this movie. I took my daughter and my mom to see it this week. I saw it twice this week. And it's hard to watch a movie about somebody that people remember so well. You watch a movie about Benjamin Franklin or Franklin Roosevelt or somebody like that, or maybe even John F. Kennedy. Few people remember their voice. Few people remember FDR for certain. Few of them are left. But when you do a movie about Ronald Reagan, who was only 40 years ago, many people know who he was, remember his voice. And you might think, oh, this is kind of like I'm an Elvis fan and watching an Elvis impersonator. Well, there's really only one Elvis, one voice like that. And it's true that Dennis Quaid is not Ronald Reagan, but he does a really, really good job in this movie with both his voice and Reagan's characteristics, his walk and the way his facial expressions. It doesn't take long to get drawn into the movie and think you're really watching this movie about the life of former President Ronald Reagan. And that movie is important because, number one, it focuses on his faith, which is not often talked about. Throughout the movie, and I've read dozens of books, probably more than any other person I've read books about Ronald Reagan. The movie is accurate. That's why the left hates it. They're panning this. They're giving it poor reviews. But this is a family-friendly movie about a life that is so important. I think biographies are very important for our kids to learn because it shows how people live out their faith, how people do great things, how they aspire to great things. And this movie focuses, of course, on Ron's relationship with Nancy, his love for Nancy and vice versa, his love for his mother and his love for the Lord, and his love for America and his hatred of communism. And the movie focuses on Reagan the Crusader, and it's based on the book called Reagan the Crusader, in his effort to bring down the USSR, which he, Pope John Paul, and Margaret Thatcher worked together to successfully do. If that interests you, if you've seen that movie and you want to learn more about it, there's a phenomenal documentary called In the Face of Evil, Reagan in Word and Deed, that actually interviews Soviets who admit Reagan brought down the USSR with the steps he took, with the speeches he made, and they openly admit that he did things at Reykjavik by not giving up SDI that actually brought Russia to the brink of collapse, which we saw happen. Now, the sad thing in the movie is, if you think about it, communism is alive and well. There's no USSR anymore, but communism is alive and well in America, and many people are embracing it without even knowing it. And that's one of my fears. That's one of the reasons why I think this movie is very important to see. Plus, it's great entertainment. So I would encourage you to support that movie if you like to see movies. I very rarely go to the theater myself. There's not much to watch. But this is one I would encourage you to see and to support, because the more you support it, if you go see it, the more screens it will be on later after this first opening week. And I think people in America need to see this movie. Many people know Reagan, kids know Reagan, but most of the kids today were born after that. It seems like yesterday to me, but I was a teenager when President Reagan was president. He had a huge influence on my political philosophy. And so I think this is a great movie to take young people to learn about the presidency. And I'll be honest, Reagan was bigger than life. He was, even the way he carried himself, and you can see it in the clips in the movie where they show actual clips of Ronald Reagan. This man had stature, and it concerns me that the presidency has lost a lot of stature, a lot of professionalism. It drives me crazy when President Trump, President Biden use profanity. I've said that many times. The president shouldn't do that. The president is a person that many people look up to. He sets a standard. But politics reflects culture. It's not the other way around. As our culture declines, our politicians will probably get worse. We may well be in a situation, we may be there now, where we as Christians no longer have a choice between a Christian candidate and a non-Christian candidate, or between two Christian candidates. So we have to pick candidates who most reflect our values. Even if they don't fit the top 5 values we have, we may have to pick the top 4 and make a decision there. But I would encourage you to see this movie, take your family to see it. But also, as we look at the election coming up, we will soon have our voter guides available that we have online. Our national office owns a company called iVoterGuide, and you can go to iVoterGuide.com. You can go there now and see how it works. But the fall surveys are not up yet, but they soon will be, and people in Indiana can go look at the candidates of governor, state representative, congressman, president, statewide offices, and see how they've answered their surveys, who's donated to them, positions they've taken at iVoterGuide.com. Those will be available in early October when early voting starts, and I will let you know through our weekly email when those are available. But I would encourage you to be ready for the election, but more importantly, the point of this video today is use the time you have wisely with your children, your grandchildren, your family members to supplement what they're learning in school, to be countercultural, to instill in them values, to teach them about things that schools are not teaching, the culture is not teaching. Teach them about great people who aspire to great things, great people who made a difference for the Lord, and a difference for America, a difference in industry, a difference in science, things that matter, because who we aspire to look up to influences our character a great deal. You know, the Bible says bad company corrupts good morals. The reverse of that is true too. Good heroes, good people aspire us to good values. So I would encourage you to do that. I know that's nothing deep today, but I think it's a good reminder to us that we have a limited amount of time with our kids or our grandkids, and try to influence them. Do everything possible to make your children, yourself, and your grandchildren, your nieces and your nephews and people around you, countercultural, because our culture is poisonous and it's destroying our nation. You know, many kids today are taught there's nothing good about America. There's nothing good in the past about America. That is so not true. And great biographies, great history show us the people aspired for the great things of America, the great values of America. So I hope that's helpful today. Many of you are doing this. Thank you for what you're doing. But I wanted to show you a few resources, just a couple ideas of you to get to think about the great things of America, or great people who aspired to make a difference. Because that's what AFA wants people to do. That's what we want to do. We want to make a difference for the culture and for the goodness and the good policies that impact America and Indiana. Well, I'm Micah Clark. Hope that was helpful today. Thank you for reading our weekly emails on Wednesday. If you know someone who would like to read those, who has your values, feel free to tell them about our weekly email. Ask them to sign up online, or send us their name if they agree to it and their email. You can hit reply to my weekly email. I'll get that email, give me their name and their email, and I'll put them in our email list, because our strength is in numbers, and that's so important to educate and activate Hoosiers to take action and to learn about things that our culture is not teaching them, and the false messages and the lies that our culture is promoting today. Again, I'm Micah Clark. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for watching.